Why did they even make this movie? Welcome to What I Watch Wednesdays, where I talk about movies and TV shows that I've watched and my thoughts on them. Today we're going to be talking about Minions & Monsters, the latest edition of the ever-growing and ever-popular Minions franchise. However, this movie might not be as popular as predecessors were. The box office, it just isn't doing as great. The Minions franchise is literally one of the most popular IPs of all time. The original Minions movie, which was the first offshoot of the Despicable Me franchise, as well as Despicable Me 3, both crossed the billion-dollar mark. So when this movie was announced, a lot of people automatically thought that it would also cross the billion-dollar mark. However, this movie did not do quite as well, which may not be that much of a surprise because Despicable Me 4 and The Rise of Gru also did not cross the billion-dollar mark. The movie overall had an about $85 million budget. It is definitely still going to turn a profit. This might be due to the fact that Toy Story 5 as well as Moana have both come out fairly recently, so it's kind of sandwiched between already existing IPs in the Disney machine. However, Moana, which is a movie that I will be reviewing soon, stay tuned for that, has not done nearly as well as any of the other live action movies. On the other hand, Toy Story 5, which is yet another movie that I have reviewed on my channel, has done incredibly well, has probably taken a lion's share of the potential profits. Movie tickets these days are so expensive, and when they have to pick between Toy Story 5, Moana, and a new Minions movie, I'm assuming they're going to defer to one of those. It's interesting because even though in terms of the box office, this movie has not done nearly as well as any of its predecessors have, it's ironically doing so much better from a critical lens than any of the other Despicable Me or Minions movies have done. So it's interesting to see how even though critics didn't love any of the old movies, audiences did, and audiences don't love this movie, but critics seem to really love it. Let's talk a little bit about the entire Minions franchise. There's a lot of different movies. They've made 4 Despicable Me movies as well as 3 Minions movies. We start off with Despicable Me. It premiered in 2010 and kicked off the entire franchise. It introduced us to a few critical characters that we see repeated throughout the entire franchise, namely being Gru, the lovable villain turned hero. Gru tries to steal the moon and hijinks ensue, leading up to him for some reason adopting 3 little girls. Ultimately, Gru decides that villainy is not for him anymore and he decides to become a hero, which leads us into Despicable Me 2. Despicable Me 2 follows Gru's journey as he leaves villainy behind and joins the Anti-Villain League, where he meets Lucy, who eventually becomes a love interest for him. Lucy and Gru are on the hunt to find this other supervillain, as well as discover why purple minions are cropping up all over the place. I actually prefer Despicable Me 2 over Despicable Me 1 because Lucy's character, as well as the enhancements that they did to the minions in this movie, are so much better. I didn't really talk too much about the minions in Despicable Me because the minions were not that big of a presence in Despicable Me. They were always there, but they were kind of just there. It wasn't focused on the minions. They were just kind of side characters who were used as plot devices more than anything. In Despicable Me 2, I'm gonna guess that they've discovered how popular the minions were among the target age group, and they started ramping it up. We get introduced to a few key minion characters that we continue to see throughout the entire series, and overall they take on a much bigger focus. That focus eventually led to the Minions getting their own movie in 2015, aptly named Minions. This is the first movie in the franchise that did not focus on Gru or his family and instead focused entirely on the Minions and their adventures. In this movie, we follow along with 3 of the named Minions that we have seen from Despicable Me 1. The movie focuses on Kevin, Stuart, and Bob as they search for a new master in 1960s London and also attempt to throw their own heist for a billion-dollar crown. This movie did incredibly well. It was one of the first movies in the franchise to pass the billion-dollar mark. It did lack in any emotional depth, and that was the biggest point of contention among critics. Without Gru having just a bunch of yellow banana-type figures walking around causing chaos, did not lead to a lot of emotional depth. Then a couple of years later, we go back to the Despicable Me franchise with the 3rd movie. This premiered in 2017. This movie follows a new 1980s-esque villain, as well as the discovery of Drew, Gru's long-lost brother. All of these names are really hard for me to say, by the way. I keep getting tripped up on them. The movie also performed spectacularly at the box office, crossing over $1 billion, which was the 2nd movie in the franchise to cross that $1 billion mark. Up until the 3rd Despicable Me movie, they had been premiering new Despicable Me movies pretty much every 2 years. All the way until 2022, we didn't see any more Despicable Me movies. In 2022, we saw Minions: The Rise of Gru. I feel like this movie was the one that made Minions really, really popular. As the name might suggest, Minions: The Rise of Gru just follows along with Gru's origin story as a 12-year-old Gru finds all of the minions and starts pulling heists with them. Interestingly about this, we see that Gru is a really good master. The minions always need some kind of master. Without a master, then they just go around causing chaos. Despicable Me 4, premiering just a couple of years after that, follows Gru as he goes into hiding in a residential neighborhood and an evil little girl starts blackmailing him into helping her pull heists. He also has a baby with Lucy now, and and they're still taking care of the 3 little girls that he's adopted all the way back in Despicable Me 1. This movie did not do as well as Minions: The Rise of Gru did. I think that Minions: The Rise of Gru or Despicable Me 3 can be considered the apex of the Despicable Me franchise and Minions as a whole. After the Rise of Gru movie came out, people started getting tired of the Minions, which is why Despicable Me 4, while still overperforming at the box office, did not do nearly as well. I guess they took a little bit of time to go back to the drawing board, and they've now come out with a new Minions movie. Instead of us following the same Minions that we've known since 2010, this movie focuses on a new trio of Minions. Their names are James, Henry, and Ed. These are very different characters from the Minions that we've known up until this point. First of all, I think that they have more depth to them. They're more like main characters. James is a creative, one-eyed minion. Henry is his best friend, and Ed is a tall, deaf minion. That is a very nice addition to the franchise. Up until now, we hadn't really seen the minions' disability or anything. The movie opens up in a museum where we're introduced to those 3 characters. They apparently have made a very big mark on film history. These minions are different from the minions that we see following Gru around, and they're a little bit more chaotic, and they accidentally their masters far more often. One of their masters is a Russian wizard who, as accidentally, after one of the 3 summons a demon out of his spell book, the minions decide to go find a new master and take the spell book with them. They come across people committing a train robbery. They start chasing after this train because they're like, people who are committing train robberies are a great fit for their new master. We quickly see that the train robbery is fake and it's actually just a Hollywood film production. The movie studio thinks that these minions might be a great fit for working on the movie. This explains a lot about why Gru is able to walk around with his minions and nobody ever questions why. These minions go on to become silent movie stars. They're literally all over the place. They're in like dozens of movies. They reach very widespread success. Unfortunately, the era of silent movies does move on and sound is introduced. As we know from the other movies in this franchise, minions cannot really speak. Even though they do technically speak in gibberish, this obviously does not work with a sound-based movie, and all of their new movies quickly become flops. James is a creative minion, and he really loves the medium of film. He wants to make his own movie, even though he was just fired. He comes up with this idea called Minions and Monsters, where the minions would be fighting against a bunch of mythological monsters. At this point, this new tribe of minions breaks apart. The rest of the chaotic minions decides that this is a horrible idea, and they're going to leave to try to find a new evil master. However, James's best friends decide to stay with him. They pitch it to one of the people that they were working with, who provides them with a film camera and tells them to go for it and try to make their own movie. At this point, we get a callback to the Russian wizard. They use the spellbook to summon a monster because they are obviously a very low budget production and they don't have the ability to get a monster in any other way. This monster turns out to be fairly small. However, the monster does agree to help them find another monster that they can use in the movie. Now, the other minions have found a new leader, and he's a really evil alien who is bent set on taking over the Earth. We quickly see that he might be more talk than action. Instead of being able to do chaotic deeds and take over the Earth, their new master falls in love with a human woman and enlists the minions to try to help him get with her. Meanwhile, James and company go along with the monster that they summoned out of the Warlock's book and try to find other monsters. It leads them to a place where a bunch of sea monsters are frozen in time. He tells them that these are going to be monsters that they can use to their movie. However, he secretly has intentions to use these monsters to summon a different monster that will be used to take over the entire world. One of the minions overhears this and tries to tell James. However, he's silenced by the 2 new monsters that they just unfroze. At this point, both storylines start to intermingle, with the alien fleeing in terror, supposedly, after seeing Irene, and the other minions being forced to help. Irene does unfortunately manage to swallow Henry, and James goes in to try to rescue him. All of the other minions that were abandoned take over the military to try to help out. Irene gets destroyed, but then reconstructs herself. At the last minute, though, the alien that we thought ran away in terror comes back in a futuristic spaceship along with the other minions that still followed him and destroys Irene. Henry and James cast a spell out of the spellbook in order to retrap all of the monsters that they set out while trying to make their movie, and the public starts treating these minions as heroes. Ed, the deaf minion, has managed to capture this entire sequence on camera, and the film gets produced and is premiered months later, to which they receive standing ovations. Going all the way back to the beginning of the movie, all of this is revealed to be a movie inside of a movie. In the mid-credits sequence, though, we do see that the spellbook from the Warlock ends up in the hands of the original minions that we were introduced to, namely Gru's minions, as well as one of his daughters. Now let's talk about what actually works. The best thing, like I said, is the introduction of these new minions. They definitely brought new life into the franchise. James being a minion with actual passions as well as having an emotional arc, Ed having a visible disability. It actually had emotional depth that we could root for instead of being yet another Minions movie where people are just falling victim to the chaos that the minions are creating. I think that the writers of the movies realized that following that same formula was not going to work anymore and they need to do something different. They really did try in this movie to do something different and drive the minions to have actual character depth and character development instead of diving into mindless chaos. That does make me wonder, though, what happened to Gru's minions to make them that instead of being these more intelligent minions. I don't know if I could call them intelligent. I also think that the choice to make the minions into silent movie stars works really well because A, it solves the question that I personally have been having since I first saw these movies of why nobody is questioning why Gru has a bunch of weird yellow monsters following him around and babysitting his very young daughter. One of the strongest suits of the minions is them just doing mindless funny things. So the slapstick humor of the silent movie era really lends itself to facilitating humor. And it also works really well seeing the minions not just mindlessly always win. The minions inevitably always win in some way, or they very rarely actually suffer, in part because of the lack of character depth they have, and in part because they're the main characters. In this movie, we follow along with a very natural trajectory of the minions getting to a very high position in Hollywood, being movie stars, and then ending up nowhere. I think that that progression works very well. You can tell that the writers had a very genuine love for the era. This entire movie is written like a love letter to that era of Hollywood, as well as the transition to sound films. It kind of reminds me of Only Murders in the Building season 5. The entirety of the beginning of the 5th season was like a silent movie era inspired love letter, really. This movie follows that very, very well too. They were very much so paying homage to that era of Hollywood. The biggest strength of this movie comes from the fact that they took us to a different group of minions, and this allowed them to give these minions emotional depth, character development, and make the Minion movie follow a narrative arc. The previous movies really suffered because all the minions can do is be slapstick humor. Their pure purpose is to be funny in a movie where every other character has actual character development. The second movie of the Minions sub-franchise follows along with the minions as they cause chaos, in that the minions are purely there to cause chaos. You could take them out of the movie and the movie would operate basically the same way. Without the minions in this movie, the movie would not exist. And I think that that focus shift was done in a very thoughtful manner. I think that the writers noticed that minions just being mindless drones that follow along with an evil master no longer works, which is why they made James his own master. The end where we get revealed that this entire sequence has just been a movie inside of a movie, I thought it was really cheesy. Unfortunately, this is one of the biggest problems of the movie too. The whole movie within a movie would have been clever, but there were frankly too many things going on. There were so many different subplots. First of all, we see that the minions have become Hollywood stars, and wait, we're actually following a completely different set of minions from the minions that we've known all along. Then there's an evil alien that some of the minions go with, and it's just really, really messy. There were two distinct plots in this movie, one being the evil alien and his love story, and one being this trio trying to make a successful Hollywood movie. They kind of just forced these two together. It was extremely confusing, and I think that they were debating in the writer's room to tell these two different stories, and they didn't know how. Ultimately, they decided to just tell half of each story. That was the biggest detraction of the movie. I didn't like how they couldn't commit fully to either plot, and they decided to just shoehorn both into the movie. If they had decided on just doing one or the other, it would have been such a strong movie. I can definitely see them making this movie an homage to silent movies, and then making the next one the alien guy being introduced as saving the minions, because that was kind of how Gru was introduced to the franchise. He saved the minions, and that's why they're so loyal to him. But I guess that's too much repetition for the writers, so they didn't do it that way. But the way that they did do it did not really land, and it was just confusing. The weirdness between these two parallels makes it so that the pacing of the movie is completely off. Jumping back and forth between us trying to see James make a movie and then going to the weird alien guy and seeing him try to woo a random human woman, go on dates with her, is just really strange. Again, that's why I think that they had two different ideas for this movie and they just forced them together in a way that ultimately did not make the most sense. Now, I will say that that is something that the Minions franchise has done as a whole. In almost every movie, we see two different subplots forming. Like Despicable Me 2 had Dr. Nefario leaving and a bunch of minions going with him. We normally do just follow three main minions and their journeys, but the other minions that are relegated to subplots don't have such a significant subplot that doesn't make sense to the main narrative. In this movie, it didn't really make narrative sense. To me, it more so felt like they were trying to shoehorn in a way to separate separate out the minions and follow their formula. For example, the monsters that just keep getting summoned out of this magic book, it felt like that was being shoehorned in. They were nameless villains. I barely even named any of the monsters besides Irene. With or without a name, the story doesn't change. There's no reason for these monsters to be here except to introduce an antagonist to the movie. They shoehorned in Gru and his family at the very last second. It's like they realized very late into the movie that, oh no, we have to fit in a way to tie all this back to Gru. This Minions movie also introduces a new facet to the universe, magic. I'm very interested in seeing where the Minions franchise takes this new element. Magic, I think, was something that was a part of the movies from the beginning, obviously, since Minions exist, but we've never directly seen any ties to magic. In this movie, they directly said that there's an evil wizard, and at the end of the movie, the magic spellbook falls into Gru's hand. Magic will, from now on, play a part in all Despicable Me movies. I'm interested in seeing how they do that, because one of the things that I like most about the franchise is that even though obviously there are minions and it's very weird, the movies feel fairly grounded. Ultimately, even though this movie is not nearly as funny as the earlier movies in the franchise, and it isn't nearly as emotionally deep as earlier movies in the franchise, I think that it is a step in the right direction. They are trying to make it so that they can make movies that are funny but also emotionally moving and introduce new facets to the universe, which I'm excited to see. Ultimately though, even though this movie is a very well done movie and plot-wise leads ahead of the other Minions movies, it doesn't quite meet the standards that the Despicable Me movies do, which is why I'm only giving it a 6 out of 10. I thought that the movie was okay. I think that there's genuinely some really great aspects of the movie, but it doesn't hit as hard as any of the old movies in the franchise did, and it just wasn't as funny as the other Minions movies were. I think that that's why this movie has not done nearly as well in the box office as any of the old movies. That is all for today. Let me know if you guys have seen the Minions and Monsters movie and what you guys thought of it. I love you guys so much. Let me know what else I should watch below, movies or TV shows. It's totally fine. And I will see you guys next time. Bye!